So we will start now. Thank you everyone for joining in this evening. I can see a few names, regulars. So welcome and also welcome to the new ones. My name is Maria. I'm one of the conservation officers in the DDCR, the Dubai Desert Conservation Reserve. So just as a background, the DDCR is the first national park that was established in the UAE. We have 225 square kilometers of pristine desert where a lot of species of animals and plants native to the UAE live. So we basically do research about them. So we started this series last year with just in general scientists that have done some research in the UAE. So last year was the part of scientists studying anything, doing some research in the DDCR, and this year is for anyone doing anything here in the UAE. So today we have Georgina. I know Georgina from last year because she came to do kind of like a volunteer thing for a week in the DDCR. And obviously we discovered how amazing she is, so we needed to invite her. She is a mycologist. She studies fungus. You will know what it is in case you don't know yet. She will explain to you. And she's the species survival manager in Terra. Okay. So that's it. And I will give the floor to her because she will talk a lot, I know, and everything very interesting. So pay attention. Georgina.
Thanks, Maria. You always have the best intros. Thank you. Okay, I'll go ahead and share my screen. So give me a shot. Anybody, whenever you're able to see
Working.
the presentation. All right. Okay, I can't see myself, so I don't know if anybody's saying things to me, but drop them in the chat. We'll get around to them. And then if you do have a second device with you, try and hop on to Slido. We've got a few fun questions, a bit to sort of feel the room and understand where everybody's at today. So if you've got a phone with you or any second device with you, you can go ahead and scan the QR code, and that'll sort of bring you in to our Slido polls. You'll see on Slido, when you have it on your phone or your device, there's a little part that says Q&A. If you put in any questions there, it'll continue to keep adding up there until the very end of the presentation. And so when we do get to that slide where it does say questions, I'm able to see any questions you've asked from the very, very, very beginning. Yeah, so feel free to drop in your thoughts, your questions, any comments you have throughout the presentation, and then all of them will pop up at the end. All right. Like Maria said, I work at Terra. My name is Georgie. I work at Terra. I've been trying to study fungi in the UAE for quite a while now, but it was this year, just over 2 months ago, actually, in the middle of June when we launched our IUCN Center for Species Survival. And so we're looking at fungal diversity in the UAE, and we're looking at how we can better protect that. For anybody who hasn't been to Terra, that's what my wonderful place where I work looks like. It is like my home, and you'll see we've got all of this beautiful native sort of flora around us as well. And so we do quite a bit on native plants, on urban biodiversity, and now we're looking at fungi in particular. Okay, for anybody who's hopped onto Slido, if you just want, you'll see a poll pop up on your phone or your device. The QR code is still there if you want to scan it. But yeah, I just want to sort of go around and see what does the word fungi mean to you. Feel free to also drop comments in the chat if you don't have a second device. I'll also be able to see the words there. But yeah. Okay. Ooh, starting with the big words. Mycelium. Very nice. Very nice. Organism. Yep. It sure is a type of organism away from plants and animals. A symbiotic organism with simple structures. A fungi. Yeah. All right. Correct. All valid. Mushrooms, bouncy helmets, weird and funny shaped things. Yep. Okay, if that looks really big right now, that's because everybody has said mushroom. So that's the most common answer so far, which is great. It absolutely is. Okay, connecting beings. All right, very nice. I love that. You can keep them coming. We can come back to them at the very end as well. Very good. Decomposes, yeasts. Okay. Murder trial. Yep. She was found guilty. Very good. Saprophyte. All right. Wood Wide Web. Okay. So we have a pretty decent understanding. If you had to like rank yourself on like I don't know fungi at all, to like, I love fungi and I know almost everything about it. Where do you think you would fall on that scale? And the reason I wanted to put this up is because it gives me good context as to what level of basics I can delve into while we talk about it. Okay, we're standing strong in the middle there, which is nice. I tend to find myself mostly on that bit or the little smiley face after. All right. We've got both of those sides. Hang up. Okay. So the average is sort of smack in the middle there. Okay, so Maria very kindly asked me if I could also delve into a bit of the basics of fungi. And so we'll do a bit of that as we're going through. And we'll try and see if this graph changes at all as we go through the meeting. Yeah? Okay. Remember your score for now. Remember where you were at. Remember what you know about fungi. Yeah? And then we'll get started and we'll go from there. Okay. So to really be able to understand it, we need to first think of where it started, right? Where does it all come from? This picture you're seeing on the screen right now, the one that says fungal tree of life, this is only macroscopic, which is what you can see with your eyes. So it's your macro fruiting bodies of your mushrooms. And this picture only really came into existence over the last few years. This is from research that was published in 2017, and still it doesn't actually explore everything, right? And that's because we're only now still continuing to find ancient fossil records, right? And trying to piece together what the evolution and the story and the history of fungi might look like. So far, what we think might be our oldest record comes from Arctic Canada. And this was, again, only in the last 2 years, I think, that we started to get research out of this, but we started to find what we think could be fossilized fungi that would live in aquatic regions or in water, right? So 1 billion years ago, we had these little tiny pieces of what we think was fungi. They had what we call zoospores and whip-like structures called flagellum that would push them in the water, and they're going around reproducing asexually, massively increasing in number, but we don't really know anything else about them, right? Then 500 million years ago, we start to see the evolution of plants on land, right? The first plants, if what you're seeing on the screen, you recognize that one, it's mosses, right? So mosses and liverworts were some of the first plants that came around. And so fungi realized, okay, our spores need to also like be able to evolve on land. And so they started to form associations with these first plants, help them get more nutrients. And so they started to have complex like structures, right? And then I don't know what happened 400 million years ago, guys, because look at that picture and look how ridiculous that looks. But these were called prototaxites. They are an extinct, what we think is a fungal variant, eukaryotic, and they're meant to be 8 meters tall. They were meant to be saprophytes, prototaxites. Honestly, there is still debate in the world of mycology and fungi whether these are actual plants or fungi, or none of those two. But the closest record we've been able to find might suggest that they were fungi, right? So that's what they look like. And then they started to evolve complex spore-bearing structures to eventually what we now see and understand as mushrooms, right? And so I wanted to put this picture out that these are some of the mushrooms that I've been able to get my hands on from when I travel around the world. And so you will see they grow in all sorts of varieties. There's different shapes, different colors, different substrates, which is what they grow on. You'll see some are in the desert. That one at the top was found at Terra. That one, at the bottom line, the second picture that looks like a really pretty flower with black petals was actually found at DDCR from that week that Maria was talking about earlier. We'll look at that one in a bit more detail after. But you'll see they're sort of everywhere and they look like many different things, right? Which is one of the biggest reasons why we struggle to study it. And it was only 56 years ago, right? 1969, in some of our parents' lifetimes and in our family members' lifetimes, that it was actually classified as a separate kingdom of its own, right? The 6 little symbols you see on top are the 6 kingdom classification. So you've got your animals, your plants, your fungi, your bacteria, your eubacteria, archaebacteria, but your protista. And it was only 56 years ago that we were able to achieve that status as a separate kingdom, right? And we now know that it's a separate kingdom, but how many species of fungi do you think we think might exist? So if you had to guess, so if you look back on your phone, you'll be able to see this poll pop up. But how many species do you think we think there are? I will give you a clue. It is, we think, the second largest kingdom to exist today, right after animals, fauna, right? Okay, so we've got 5 million, 2 million's going up, all right, 1 million in there as well. Okay, so majority of you think it could be 5 million species. Okay, great answer. And if I'm being completely honest, okay, very nice. We've got 5 million in the chat as well. If I'm being completely honest, we don't really have that much of a clue. But I will tell you that all of the estimates right now suggest that there's anything between 2.3 million all the way up to 6 million species of fungi, right? Anything between that. And out of this, at least 2 million that we know for sure exists, all the way up to 6 million, we have only named and described and studied 150,000 of them. Imagine the data gap there is that we don't yet know and that we're still exploring, right? And so that brings us to our top 3 kingdoms, our flora, our fauna, and our fungi. And one of the questions I get asked a lot is it not just another plant? Like, aren't fungi just like slightly fancier, weirder looking plants? Do they really need to be a separate kingdom of their own? And I say yes, okay? But this was something that Maria had asked me earlier as well. And it was like, what is it that makes it a separate kingdom, right? And there are 4 things I like to remember. So I put them in those 4 little circles. This is one of my favorite mushrooms, by the way. They look absolutely ridiculous. Falls under the Boletus category. But you'll see from your 4 symbols, the first one being food, is that plants can photosynthesize, right? They make their own food. Us as animals, we ingest food, right? So we can consume, we can ingest food. Fungi can't do either of those things. So they don't have the ability to ingest any food. They don't have the ability to produce their own food either. But what they do is they can secrete enzymes from their body that can break down what's around them, and then they can absorb the nutrients from that, right? So we call it saprotrophic nutrition. So they can absorb what's around them and get energy and grow from that. So that's how they get their food source. So it's very, very different from both plants, flora, and animals, fauna, right? The second one, that little energy symbol, the thunderbolt, what is their energy role, right? Plants are producers. Like I said, they produce their own food, they're producers. We are consumers, right? That's like our primary role. And fungi are decomposers or recyclers, right? So they're looking for dead organic material that's high in nutrients, but is not really accessible by most organisms. They're looking at ways they can break that down and get energy from that, right? So they're recyclers or they're decomposers. The wall, the brick wall that you see is, if you go into the biology of fungi and their cell walls, plants have cellulose as their cell walls, right? Us as animals, we don't really have a cell walls. We have membranes, but we don't really have cell walls. Fungi have what I think is the coolest cell wall. They have chitin, and chitin is the same material that you find on insect exoskeletons and crustaceans like shells, scallops, crabs, lobsters. What makes up their shell? Chitin, fibrous mineral. That's what makes up the resilient and rough and tough cell wall of fungi, right? It's very similar in function to keratin in us as human beings, what's in our hair and what's in our nails, right? So the protein. And so that's, again, a really, really cool function. And then do they breathe? Where do they lie on that? So we know that we respire, right? We can take in oxygen, give out carbon dioxide. Plants can do the opposite. Fungi are a lot like us in that they can also respire with oxygen, and they do produce carbon dioxide, right? So there are so many differences that actually make them completely different from flora, but it's only been in the last few years that we've been able to study this to an extent where we can say, okay, they are different, right? But when we think of mushrooms, when we think of fungi, this is the one guy that comes to everybody's mind. And it's no surprise, it's so bright and so vivid and so striking. And little toadstool there, little toad, was also inspired by this mushroom. We call this the fly agaric or the red toadstool. And I put this in because really it's a symbol of what got people interested in mycology, first of all, but also because it has such cool stories related to it. So when you hop off this call, one of the things you can go and read about is how in a lot of the Eastern European countries, there is folklore about the origins of Christmas and how it comes from rituals and traditions that are to do with this particular mushroom, the fly agaric. So really, really cool story. Go check it out. Right. And then if we were to break down fungi just a little bit, I'll give you just little tidbits of what makes it fungi. So if we were to look at some of the things that make it fungi, spores, right? Spores are the little reproductive cells. So for plants, we need to plant a seed and then it will grow into our sapling, into our tree, give us fruit. For mushroom, it grows from a spore. And you'll see spores come in all sorts of colors and sizes. You'll see the one that says K over there has like compartments and walls. The one that says O literally has arms, so it can swim and move itself around in water. And you can see why scientists throughout history would have confused this with plant cells, with amoeba, with bacteria, right? Because they look like all of those things. And some of these pictures are dyes, like A, that's blue dye for sure, but we do find different colored spores based on the color of the mushroom. So pink spores, green spores, yellow spores, brown spores, black spores, they all exist, right? So really, really hard to understand. And spores have evolved that way so that they can ensure the survival of their species. For anybody who plays this game, you can drop it in. It's Stardew Valley. It's one of my favorite games. But you'd know that if you had pigs on your farm, they would give you truffles, right? And that's because some spores have even evolved to be able to create a really, really pungent smell so that animals can come dig them up and find them to disperse their spores, right? So in Italy, for example, I have a colleague, Christiana, she always talks about how dogs there are trained to go hunt for porcini and chanterelles. And so there are so many animals that dig up, right? And that's what they're smelling, the spores that they can then help with dispersal. And so spores are really, really cool. But when spores travel and they find the right sort of space where they can settle down and grow, they grow by producing what we call hyphae, right? So hyphae are these thin thread-like structures that start to grow out of each of these spores. And at the tips of all of the hyphae, that's what you're looking at, is where they secrete that enzyme from to be able to break down things, right? So they will settle down, they'll start to grow this hyphae every which way. And when they find a lot of food in one spot and they see that it's the right conditions, they'll produce masses and masses and masses of hyphae, and that together is what we call the mycelium, right? So when we think of what the roots of this mushroom can look like, this is what that would be. So that's what creates the mycelium, and the mycelium connects most of our environments all around the world is connected because of this mycelium that's under the ground. And so it's really, really cool. So if we go back to that evolution that we spoke about earlier, remember the mosses, the liverworts that came in the first plants? Those first plants had no way of absorbing nutrients, right? And most research today will tell you that the way they were able to survive and continue as floral life is because the fungi that were there then evolved with their system to act almost as like fake roots, but provide them nutrients through the mycelium and through the hyphae, right? And so that relationship where the mycelium meets the plant roots like this in this picture, and they help each other out with nutrients and water, is what we call a mycorrhizal relationship, right? And so this is what a healthy mycorrhiza would look like. And it connects kilometers of the forest under the soil, right? What we don't even see. You'll see it doesn't connect different species. It doesn't connect same species. It connects different species of trees. So it helps trees literally talk to each other. We call it the wood wide web very lovingly, like how we have the world wide web to like look up things when we want answers. Our trees and our forests rely on the wood wide web for when they need a bit of extra nutrients, for when a tree is sick and dying and it needs a bit more TLC, for when an invasive tree comes in and you maybe want to starve it off because it's a non-native and it might affect the rest of your forest. When a baby sapling is growing in the forest, but it's covered under the shade of its mama tree, and so it needs a little bit more nutrients and a little bit more love. The mycelium responds to all of those things. So that's growing research about how the forest above us is alive because of a whole world that lives underneath it. For anybody who watches Star Trek, you'll know that that's the USS Discovery, and the USS Discovery is run by Commander Paul Stamets, and Commander Paul Stamets is their resident mycologist, really, and he studies the spore network, right? The spore propulsion system, spore network propulsion system that the USS Discovery runs in, right? And that's a nod to real life mycologist Paul Stamets, who studies mycelium, right? So behind me somewhere here is a book called Mycelium Running. Highly recommend reading if you're interested in learning about the mycelium. But it's so cool that we're able to get pop culture references and get sort of attention to what mycology can be, right? And this is from way, way, way back. And so we've been studying the mycelium since then and what it does for us. And when it's finally ready and the conditions are right and the mycelium is all established, it will fruit. And when it fruits, it gives us what we know as mushrooms, right? So when we think of fungi, the one word that popped up even at the very beginning in our poll was mushrooms, right? That's what we see as the one big thing. But if you look at the whole life cycle of what a mushroom looks like, of what fungi looks like, you'll see that the mushroom is such a tiny, tiny part of it, right? And that's why it's so important as mycologists that we try and study everything that leads up to the mushroom. But you can imagine how hard it is when everything that leads up to the mushroom is almost invisible to the naked eye, right? And that's why it's still a growing field of study. Okay, if you still have your poll open, Now that we're at mushrooms, how long do you think the lifespan of a mushroom might be? So we're talking about mushrooms, right? So how long do you think mushrooms survive? Okay, 1 to 3 weeks, 1 to 3 days. We've got decades, we've got centuries. Very nice, very nice. Okay, so we're seeing top two. Okay, 1 to 3 months. We've got answers all over the board. I love it. I love it. Very nice. Okay, majority of you seem to say between the 1 to 3 days and the 1 to 3 weeks. And on average, over 87% of what we see as mushrooms will only last between 1 to 3 days, right? That's usually the time frame they have before they either sporulate, which is they release their spores and they finish their maturity and they start to die, right? Between when they're too young to be collected or to be studied. So they're still not open and you can't quite see their spores. So that period of like maturity in adult life is almost only between 1 to 3 days, right? So imagine what a short time span we have to be able to study these organisms, right? We need people out there all the time to just stare and wait for the mycelium to think the conditions are right and through. And we've got up to 3 days, usually less, to try and collect a sample if we want to sequence it, to try and understand what's happening before we lose that species. And so we've almost always said that while there is so much work to be done, the work needs to be done now because we already think that there are fungal species that have not been studied that have already gone extinct, right? But while the mushroom, the fruiting body, can only last about 1 to 3 days or sometimes weeks, depending on the mushrooms, sometimes the months is also not bad. So when we have like really hardy wooden shelf-like mushrooms that we call Ganoderma, I'll show you a picture a little bit later, those might last for like a few months before they hit that maturity level, right? What exists for decades and sometimes centuries is that mycelium, right? And so if we're able to nourish that mycelium, if we're able to keep that mycelium alive and keep it going when the conditions are right, every season it will fruit for us, right? It will give us those mushrooms that we can then study. And so that's why it's so important while we study mycology and while we understand how we can keep the mushrooms safe and protect them and study them, it's so important how we can keep the trees above it alive, how we can keep them functioning with the soil ecology, right? So that the mycelium stays alive. And so the whole life cycle, when we look at it, right, of what fungi can look like, most of it happens underground. Now, these are some of the things that we covered. Now, obviously, not all fungi will have the same life cycle. Like some of them will not even grow hyphae ever, like yeast, which is a very common fungi, just reproduces asexually, so it'll just continue to like break apart and continue producing. But the mushrooms that we tend to study will sporulate the way we saw it. They'll grow into the little hyphae. The hyphae will make those dense masses of mycelium. And when the condition's right, it will sprout into another mushroom, right? And so that's why it's so hard to study mushrooms and understand their conservation, because our time frame to how long we have to be able to sequence them and understand them is very little. And you'll see why that's important after. Okay, mushrooms. Mushrooms, like I said earlier, come in all sorts of shapes and sizes. You'll see some of them are in clusters, some look incredibly slimy, and that's intentional to attract like flies, for example, to come and sit. There's one that looks like coral almost, and it's called coral fungi, but they really take on the form of, like somebody said in the poll earlier, these really weird looking structures, right? And that's what got me so fascinated with them. It's like, what sort of evolution led you to be able to do this and create this form, and why is that important, right? So they come in all sorts of forms and sizes. But these are from around the world, and so I'll quickly put in a few that would be specific to both the UAE, but also arid ecosystems, right? So if you go out to the desert, if you've been around long enough, and if you've been walking around the desert, and if you've been observant, chances are you've seen these mushrooms. So we call them desert shaggy manes. Yeah, desert shaggy manes. The scientific name is Podaxis pistillaris. And they are club-like mushrooms. So you can see how it's sprouting almost from the ground. It's got a really long stem, right? And then there's a bulbous base that sits under the ground and is covered until it comes out. The cap, so we call that top entire bulbous bit the cap. you'll see the cap is like really, really papery, right? Like it looks like it can just flake off into like little pieces. And that's very intentional because as it starts to do that, it's maturing and it's growing older. And the spores are on the inside of that. So as it starts to weather away that cap, it is able to then release its spores and continue its life and survival, right? So we usually look for that papery cap because that's what will emerge from the ground. It turns like dark brown to black towards the end of its life as it's falling apart. And so it changes colors as it's growing, and it's got really powdery spores that you'll sometimes see on the ground settled next to it. I also study what we call ethnomycology. Ethno meaning of people, of civilizations, of culture, mycology being of mycelium, of fungi. And so how have people traditionally been able to use the fungi that's available around them for our human needs? And so how does nature and the environment and people intersect in that way? And so this particular mushroom, Podaxis pestillaris, there are records of people both eating it and using it for medicine, right? So historically, and even now, I still find Emirati families that wait for the season for the desert shaggy mane so that they can go forage, right? And then when it's really in its young stage, so before it starts withering that little paper stuff, the papery cap, they will try and go get a few, but it comes down, it's passed down through generations, right? The Bedouins started this method of foraging. And so they know what it's like to ethically harvest every season and make sure that there's still enough to sporulate for the next season. But they will harvest it and they will eat it. And locally, it's called arain. So if you have any Emirati families, if you've got friends, you can ask them about arain, learn the recipes that they use. I'm still learning. I try and get stories from everybody that I meet because this is all traditional knowledge that's being lost. Right. So one of the things that we do at the center as well is capturing these stories and making sure we're able to archive them for both the UAE's heritage, but also for us as human beings, right? And how we connect with our environment. And so that's a really cool story. And then you'll see as it grows, the little papery sort of cap that's coming apart. There are records of Bedouins being able to use it almost like a band-aid, right? So if there was an open wound and they were walking through the desert, they believed that it had antimicrobial and antibacterial properties, that they would be able to slap it on top of the wound and it would keep it safe from any infection, but also stick onto your skin and make sure that it is protected until it starts to heal. And so there's stories of it being used for both food and for medicine, which is really, really cool. This is another one that's more common. So it's likely that you might have seen this one if you're walking around. So that picture that you saw earlier from the very, very beginning where I said it was a mushroom that was found at DDCR, it's the same species, right? So we call it Montagnia arenaria, and it's the desert ink cap, right? Desert ink cap. And you can, it's very self-explanatory as to why it's called ink cap. You'll see that as it starts to grow and mature, it turns into this black, almost ink-like substance. That's how it'll also like break apart. And this is what all the adult and the mature mushrooms would look like. So they've got very slender stems. They're very, very tall sometimes, and not all of that length is visible above the ground. So you'll see almost half of those really long stems is actually underground. And so that's how they grow, with their really like bulbous base at the tip as well. And so this is Montagnia arenaria. We don't have a lot of research on this, but these are two species that we are almost confidently able to say are native to the desert region on our end. So the UAE, the Saudi, Oman, because of how often we've been able to find it. So both abundance and previous research that currently exists. And so this is another one that you can look out for. It rained some time back, and we've got forecast for rain in a while as well. So if you go about a week and a half, 2 weeks after it does, you'll likely see Montagnia arenarias popping up in the desert everywhere. They're quite common to find. And they have, an egg-shaped sort of body as they start to grow, and then they'll break apart into petals that look like this. And then we've got truffles, which are one of my favorite mushroom-like fungal organisms. And I say that because a lot of my colleges will say that they're not really true mushrooms, and they don't really quite look like it either. You could like very easily walk by that and think, just another rock in the desert, and completely miss it, right? But we have desert truffles, and so like how truffles exist around the world, desert truffles exist here in the UAE and in our land around it. And they are edible as well. So locally, they are known as faga, and it's a very, very hearty mushroom that is cooked in stews and stir fries, and it's very, very tasty. And I haven't put up the species names here, and you'll see that's because they all look the same. even to like trained eyes, even to mycologists, but they're actually really different species. So the one at the very bottom, we call it the Terfesia. And the Terfesia is slightly less common on this end. It's a lot more common in Saudi, but there's emerging research as to how it grows, what plant it grows in association with, where it grows. So that's research that's currently being undertaken by centers around the UAE. And then we've got Termania species sort of in the triangle there all around. And so there's Termania nivea, Termania pinoi are some of the species that we've been able to find here in the UAE. And so desert truffles are really, really cool. Again, great ethnomycological reference in that they're edible mushrooms, historically been foraged, but it comes down to us to be able to understand where they grow, the helianthemum plant or the rock rose plant that they grow in association with, where do we find them? We don't have a diversity map. We don't know where abundance might strike. We don't know what hotspots look like. So there is so much research and work that could be done, right? And this goes almost way to the back. Now, we saw this earlier, the Podaxis pistillaris, and I wanted to put this up because earlier I was talking about how our what we have as the time span to be able to sequence mushrooms is already so short. But this is an example of why that is important, right? Because we saw this earlier. This is the Podaxis pistillaris, and what's on the left honestly looks so similar. And I couldn't find a picture of it in the desert, but we have specimens of it collected here. There's a few in the Plant Genetic Resources Center in Elaine. There's a few in the Sharjah Seed Bank. But that is a different species called the Copernus. So it's a Copernus species, Copernus comatus. And you can see how ridiculously similar they look. When they're both growing out of the sand, they genuinely look like the same mushroom. And unless we are able to take a specimen back to the lab, be able to sequence it, get a DNA barcode out of it, we cannot genuinely be confident that they're two separate species, right? One's a completely like shaggy on the shaggy main end of it. The other one's a completely Copernus is an ink cap. So it's on the ink cap end of it. And so both of these species are found in the UAE. But this is why it's so important that we're able to keep each other informed when we find a species, that we're able to get somebody to collect one of the specimens and be able to sequence it so that we're able to understand what sort of genetic diversity we have. Right now, when it comes to mushrooms in the UAE, it's not just that, right? We find mushrooms pretty much everywhere. All of these pictures, and some of these pictures were taken by some of you on this call today, and I'm saying that confidently because these are off of iNaturalist, right? So these are fungal records, macroscopic fungal records from here from the UAE. And the reason I've clubbed them all together like this, while I spoke about the other 3-4 in particular, is because we have so little data right now that we can't tell you for certain that these are native mushrooms to the UAE, right? I was talking about hardy wooden-like structures. That's Ganoderma that just popped up on the left there. And so they grow like shelves. So they're called bracket fungi or shelf fungi, and they will grow on gaff trees, on our date palms, and they're great bioindicators, which means if they're growing and if they're surviving, likely the tree is not getting what it needs. So maybe it's waterlogged, maybe there's rot. And so it's a great bioindicator that way. We get Amanita species, right? Like that one at the bottom, not the one to the left of that, that's an agaricus. Conucibes, the little sort of like milk caps that come up in little caps and then they open up. Leucocoprinus, like our flower pots. So if you've ever had a yellow mushroom grow in your plant at home, it's most likely that it was this Leucocoprinus species because it comes in our fertilizers and in our potted soil bags, potting soil bags. And so you'd see those. We have agaricus species, right? Paniolus. And so we have all of these different species that pop up around the UAE, right? And a lot of that is because a lot of our soil comes from elsewhere. Our fertilizers, right, might have spores that have traveled. Our shoes, if we have traveled somewhere else and come back, could have spores that it's carried from a different part of the world, right? And so when it comes particularly to fungi, it's really hard to understand what is native and what is not, right? But this is some of the life that we're able to see. If you've ever played Minecraft, you'd recognize this. This is glow lichen. And I wanted to quickly bring up lichen as well, because most people tend to think lichen are plants, but lichen are actually fungus in association with an organism that can photosynthesize. So like an algae or a cyanobacteria that can then form a symbiotic association with it. So fungus that can't thrive or grow in extreme conditions, right? We're talking Antarctica. We're talking the deserts of the UAE, right? These are the spots where the conditions are so extreme that fungi struggle to survive. And so they will form associations with photosynthesizing organisms that can make the food for them. And in return, they provide them with shelter. And so even in the UAE, we see quite a lot of lichen. We see crust lichen. We see desert crusts. We see them closer to the water as well. So we see marine lichen. You'll see them on the rocks. You'll see them on the trees. But they're, again, a great way for us to understand our fungal diversity as well, because at the end of the day, they're fungal organisms. For anybody who hasn't seen this movie, I do highly recommend it. It's called Nausicaa, Nausicaa, the Wind of the Valley. It's a Studio Ghibli film. This one and Princess Mononoke are two of my favorite films. But in Nausicaa, this is the princess, and she's standing in this massive toxic jungle, and she's got these mushrooms and this fungi that's growing crazy around her, right? And what it does is in the movie, it absorbs all of the pollution, all of the toxicity from the air, and makes that jungle cleaner, right? And that is actually not far from the truth, because we have seen records of fungi, right, that are able to clean up the environments that they're in. So we call this process mycoremediation, where they're able to clean up the environment that they're in. So here is samples of a fungi called Aspergillus niger, where you'll see on the very top, that control is industry effluent, right? So it's the waste byproducts from like industries. Really, really bad for the soil. And so it makes the soil not productive anymore. But the introduction of this fungi will then, you can see how it's starting to absorb and attach itself to the metal that was present in this effluent, which in this case was cadmium. And so it's collecting all of the pollutants with it, right? And then cleaning up the environment. Now imagine how cool that is and how we can potentially use that in landfills, right? Any sort of land or soil that's completely not productive anymore because of pollutants, how we're able to then start cleaning up those environments. And so there's so many cool applications that we've been able to find. Chernobyl, for anybody who knows, Chernobyl, massive disaster, right? Nuclear disaster. And so there's radiation and there's radiation poisoning. And so almost no life survives out there. But there is one black fungus that lives in Chernobyl that is now starting to create hotspots of green because it is slowly absorbing that radiation. And to this day, mycologists still go in and out of Chernobyl trying to understand why and how we can use that technology, right? And it's slowly, very, very slowly, but surely cleaning up the radiation in Chernobyl. Right now, scientists in NASA also join our mycologists because when they send out astronauts to space, there is so much cosmic radiation, right? So what if they could make astronaut suits stronger by introducing the black fungus to it, right? So there's so many cool applications that come about. And mycoremediation is only one of the answers, right? We've got mycelium packaging that a lot of you may be aware of, how they can make structures out of really strong mycelium, right? We've got the whole food and beverage industry, so how it supports food security. So there's so many ways that the world of fungi are able to help us, right? And so all of this combined, all of this study is what we refer to as when we say mycology, right? So it's not only conservation for conservation's sake for fungi, but it's also for people, right? It's for environments. It is for everything else that is around it and how all of that can survive. And then another really cool thing that we're able to do is we get to name the fungi that we find. So remember how I said there's only like 150,000 species that have been named so far. And we think on average, there's like between 2.3 to like 6 million species. Most species, every time we do like a big fungal foray, it's likely that we might find like a new cryptic or novel species. Really cool things. We get to name them, right? So I put them up for some of you to see if you can try and name them. So drop your answers in the chat if you're watching. But this one in this corner, for example, what do you think that looks like? What does that scream to you? Yeah, hand, right? Yeah, I'm sorry. If I'm looking down, it's because I'm keeping track of the chat on my phone. Yeah, it does look like a hand, and that's because we call that fungi the dead man's fingers, right? It's sort of like a dead man creeping up, coming up above the ground. Yeah, so we call them dead man's fingers. Stranger Things hand, exactly, right? Somebody else put this up in the chat earlier, but this one right here down, what does that sort of look like to you? Any answers? Yeah, exactly. So it sort of looks like a little bird's nest with eggs in it, right? So we call it the bird's nest fungi. That's how we get to give really like cool names, relatable names. And that's another reason why mycology is super, super cool. This one right on top, what do we think that one looks like? Slightly gross. Pus and blood. Yep, it is pretty metal. I agree. Super savage. I can't believe someone said passion fruit. It does look like blood. We call it the bleeding tooth, right? So it's the bleeding tooth fungus. Very, very savage. How about this one? All the way to the left. Maybe this is what Katerina, did you say this one looks like passion fruit? Strawberry. Yeah, you're in line with the fruits though. Yeah, orange, exactly. Very good. Yeah, yeah, Dylan's spot on. Exactly. We call it the orange peel fungus, right? It literally just looks like someone has left an orange peel on the ground. And it is the orange peel fungus. That's absolutely right. And then we'll do one last one, this one right here at the very bottom. This one's a stinky mushroom. If you're out in India, if anybody else has like gone to look for fungi in India, you find them quite a lot. Oh, I like that. Beehive, honeycomb. It does give very honeycomb vibes. Raincoat. I love that. Love that. You're on the right track with the sort of like clothing, apparel. Ooh, very nice. Ooh, I love all these creative answers. A bride. Yes, Maria, exactly. A bride. We call it, yeah, we call it the veiled lady, right? So it's like a bride with a wedding veil. And so we call it the veiled lady. And so you'll see we have a lot of fun, right? And so the great thing about mycology is that it really is for everybody, right? So even if you don't think you know what fungi is around you, you can make observations, and those observations will usually lead you to answers, right? And the other thing we look at, like I said earlier, is ethnomycology. So what you're looking at on the screen right now are those desert truffles that we saw earlier that get foraged, right? And so the study of how humans have been historically able to use fungi for their well-being, we're still studying that in the UAE. Actually, we're just starting to study that in the UAE and see what that might be like. But it's great because we get so much exposure to social media. We're like in games, fungi is everywhere. You probably recognize these two. That's Joel and Ellie. You probably know what they're from. And if you've seen that show, you'll know that fungus has a big role in that show as well. I wanted to put this in there because one of the biggest questions I get is, sorry, this is the Last of Us, by the way, where there's this fungus. It's called the cordyceps. In real life, we call it the cordyceps. It infects humans and turns them into like zombies. It can't happen. It's not like it's fictional, right? It's fictional, but it's fictional only in the human world. There are species of cordyceps. It's borrowed from real life cordyceps that will infect animals like insects and take over their bodies as hosts, right? And get them to higher ground to be able to spread their spores from higher. And so we do call it the zombie fungus as well. And so that exists. Parasect, for anybody who likes Pokemon, in the corner there. That's another one that's also borrowed from real life, where parasitic fungi exist, right? So fungi has both pros and cons, but unless we know what's out there, we're not able to understand how to help ourselves, right? And so I always say that no matter where you think you are, in which part of the world, fungi will thrive and fungi will exist. These are from literally from where I work, and you'll see the Ganoderma growing on that tree, right? And then you'll see, I'm holding it up there. It's a little piece of Ganoderma with roly-polies all over it, pill bugs, right? And they're all thriving and they're surviving. And so they act as these little microhabitats. But it's only by understanding what's out there that we are able to sort of track it and keep and like study them in the first place. And so if you are in Dubai, if you are in the UAE, forget Dubai. If you're in the UAE, and if you're used to using an app called iNaturalist, I highly encourage you to join the project that's currently active on iNaturalist. It's called UAE's Fungi. And so whatever species you find, wherever you are, if you just take a picture of it, right? I'll drop the link in the chat after as well. But if you just take a picture of it and upload it onto the app, us mycologists on the back end are able to see where it was found. And if we think that it's a species that we don't currently have a sequence of, we're able to go study the mycelium. We're able to go look for the specimen. And so it's really important as we start to kick off a project. So one of the first projects that the center is working on, the center that I run out of Tara, is having a UAE macrofungal checklist. So what diversity exists around us? And unless we're able to say what exists, we can't tell you how we can save it, right? So this is sort of understanding the baseline of what exists. And so go around, click pictures. Some of the things I tell people is to like carry a mirror maybe, because we like to see what's the underside of the mushroom. Because if we can't see what the sporing part looks like, it might be a different mushroom. Because you'll see here, sometimes they're gills, sometimes they're pores. This is a Russula species. So click pictures where you can see the cap, where you can see the underside. This little alien guys over here, because we call alien species our non-native species that have been either introduced or have just turned up. And so we're not able to say whether alien species are bad or are invasive because we don't yet know what species are around, right? So take pictures of what you see, put it up, give as much detail as you can in the iNaturalist, and that really helps. Yeah. Now, all of this said and done, If you've got a minute, if you could hop back onto your poll, you'll still see it active there. I want to see, what does the word fungi mean to you? So I've really only got like 2 more slides, and then it's off to questions. So you can ask me any and all questions you want for the 10 minutes after. But yeah, if you just want to go back, yeah, life. Yeah, if you just want to go back, think about what it's been like from where you started with the mushroom, and then what does the word fungi mean to you now? Underground love. Aww. Underground networks. Yeah, unseen beauty. There's medicinal, radioactive black fungus. It's interconnected. It's diverse. Yeah, it is, right? It really, really is interconnected. So what we saw, untapped knowledge, I love that. What we saw pop up earlier as the most common answer was mushrooms, right? And while it is mushrooms, it has so much more than just that. So the life cycle of a fungus is so much more than just its 3 days or weeks of being a mushroom. Healers, cleaning potential. Yeah, yeah, I love it. Okay, very good. This will stay active, so you can keep popping in after if you'd like. I love all of these answers. Thank you so much for sharing. It's very, very precious. Weird beauty. It sure is. It sure is. Oh, Katerina. Thank you. When I think of butterflies, I think of you. Okay, very good. And then if we go back to this, if you're able to now sort of think of the last hour and what you've seen on the screen. Are you able to say that you know a little bit more, even if it's a little bit more about fungi than before? Then that's already a win in my book. If there's still things you need to learn, that's massive win in my book, because really the biggest thing is to get people interested, right, about what's happening. And so that's super helpful. Okay, very nice, very nice. A lot of us are in the middle ground, which is perfect, very nice. A lot of us feel like we know a little bit more, so that average score has pulled up just a little bit, which I love. I personally think that's where I am as well, where the orange block is right now. So that's really, really cool. Very good. Very nice, very nice. This will stay open as well, so feel free to participate as much as you'd like. And then, yeah, if you've been putting questions into that poll, very nice. I should be able to see them here. Hello, hi. Thanks for joining. Have we discovered every type of fungi ever? There must be some we have never seen. Oh, there's so much we've never seen, right? We know 150,000 species. We think there's like 2 million at a minimum. And so almost every time there's a big fungal foray that people go out for and participate in, there is some novel or cryptic species that then comes back to the lab to be sequenced, and it's almost always some sort of new novel fungal species. And so one of my favorite things to just in regard, like in general about science, is the aspect of sort of curiosity and being able to learn more. And what I love about fungi is that there is more unknown than known, right? So almost every time you go out, you might actually see different ones. In the tropics, I believe mushrooms start emerging when it rains. Is there a similar pattern in the arid environment, or are they seen throughout? Great question, great question. Definitely when it rains is when we are able to start seeing some of the bigger mushroom species that we saw, like the Podaxis pistillaris, our shaggy mane, the Montagnia arenaria, the ink cap. We're able to see more of that when it rains, but things like our lichen will last decades sometimes. They just continue to live, and they have a really, really slow growth rate. So they will continue to grow as well. The mycelium is existent all the time, and so it'll continue to grow. But for our big macroscopic fungi, yes, they will emerge when it rains. It's because they require the condition to be able to fruit. Yeah. Okay. Okay, we did that. Fungus on plants. Yes. I don't. Yes, we do have fungus on plants. We have fungus in association with plants, which helps them, but we also have fungus that grows on plants and can affect them and can, like kill them. It could be infections, and those are really, really common as well. But again, until we understand all of the diversity to do with fungi, and until we study all of it, we will not be able to understand how to help that either. There is a theory that during the time when fungi ruled the earth, the planet was purple instead of green. Is that true? Your theory is as good as mine, Bert's. There are so many theories about fungi. First of all, lots of botanists will tell you that fungi did not rule the earth, and that the big prototaxites that we saw in the Devonian period from 400 million years ago are not even fungi. But honestly, what do we know? We're still looking for fossilized records. We're still looking for anything that could tell us what the evolution of fungi was like. Do we have purple fungi? Yeah, we sure do. Do we have green fungi? Yeah, we sure do. Was the planet purple? I don't know. I don't know. How big is the desert shaggy mane? Great question. I'm trying to see if I have anything around me for reference. Sorry, I have a salt and pepper shaker. If you can see that on the screen right now, that could be just your club size, and then double that is your stem size that grows underground, right? But your desert shaggy mane clubs could just be the cap could be that big. How many species have been recorded from arid regions as opposed to the tropics? Where does the research and documentation currently stand in the arid regions? Okay, so the official way to declare the extinction risk or the documentation of a species is through the IUCN and Red List. There's a global IUCN and Red List. Here in the UAE, we have national red lists for vascular plants and for birds, but for nothing else. Abu Dhabi has its own red list called the Abu Dhabi Red List that studies all kingdoms, but they focus on flora and fauna. And if you look at red lists from arid ecosystems, particularly from the Middle East, we have 0 fungal records on there. And so we really are starting from scratch in what we're aiming to do. Right now, if I just tell you the Middle East and a little bit of the West Asian bit, there are 136 fungal records of mushrooms that are on the red list, but these mostly come from Saudi Arabia, from Egypt, right? So if I look at the MENA region, go across through the North African region and West Asian region, then we get a lot more records. But just from the Middle East and where we stand, the UAE, Oman has 1 record, Saudi has a few, but we have no records. So we really are starting from scratch. There is almost no documentation that comes from the arid regions on this end of the world. On the flip side, if we look at the US, for example, there is a lot of information that come out from what they have in their arid environment, but we can't be sure that it's the same. But every time we find a species and we try and understand its substrate, what it grows in, its host, we try and see if there are links to the other ends of the world. But when it comes to just understanding fungi from different regions, arid regions are the lowest in terms of documented variety. If we find a mushroom, is there a way we can take a sample and send it into Terra or the relevant place for sequencing? Great question. Drop me a text on WhatsApp. I don't know, call me up, drop me an email and be like, hey, we think this is the cool mushroom. And then it's very easy for us to come and find it. But if there's one that you found, one, ethical harvesting, right? If you only see one mushroom, you don't want to take it out because you want it to sporulate, you want it to release its spores, right? So try and take pictures, put it up on iNaturalist. I keep track of the project every day. So if there's any new records, I'm able to see where they're coming from. If there's multiple, and if you think you can like pick up a specimen and keep it, the easiest way is to like dehydrate it, which is to introduce it to hot air. So sometimes I will put a little specimen into the oven, but leave the door slightly open and let it run for a little bit. Hair dryer, like in a panic. But if you're able to introduce it to a bit of hot air directly so that it's a little bit dehydrated, and then you put it in a Ziploc bag, then it's great. And then one of us can always come pick it up and then look at sequencing. As a species survival specialist, how do you rate the vulnerability of a species? Does this go on the IUCN list? Yeah, great question. There are categories and criteria on the IUCN Red List that we need to follow. It is based on what current information exists. And so based on that, we're able to assign it an extinction risk. Some of the things that we look for is things like population size, the population abundance, the scope or the area or the extent of the species. We look at records from around the world. We look at a diversity map. And so we look at all of these different things, and then we look at the environment that it grows in. And then based on any and all gray literature that we currently have, we're able to create an understanding of what an extinction risk look like. So an extinction risk could then be that it's vulnerable to extinction, or it's critically endangered, or it's endangered. But for most of the fungal species that we find, because we don't have enough data, it is just data deficient. So that's usually it. Studio Ghibli, wood, shout out for a fellow fan. Yeah, well done. Isn't aspergillus niger the thing we see on onions and we wash away? So if I were to scrape it and keep, it would grow and clear up pollution. Hey, only one way to find out. Yes, it is the same fungi, but I don't know if I would recommend growing it up. You could see that they were in little cultures and little plates, and that's because they will rapidly just grow. So be careful with that one. But if you do it, let me know how it goes. Will the recording of this video be available to view later? Maria mentioned at the beginning, but it will be on YouTube, so you can find it. My favorite personal fave fungi species, it's called the witch's butter. One, because it sounds rad, witch's butter, and it's like this bright yellow, vibrant, spreadable jelly-looking fungi that grows in tropical rainforests. So go look it up. Are you also looking at slime molds? Not currently. It's not within the scope of the center. Potentially, maybe at some point. But yeah, not currently in the scope of the center. We're looking primarily at macroscopic fungi, so things that we can understand what we call morphologically by just looking at it and identifying what it might be. So we're not even currently looking at things like yeast or microscopic. So those will come down the line just because there's so much to study. And what we can see, if we can study that first, that's already a win for fungi. How do we differentiate between mushrooms that are edible and those which are poisonous? Each species has its own whole criteria as to what that looks like, which is why we don't encourage anybody to go out and just start eating mushrooms. It's incredibly dangerous to do so. Us as mycologists, we are also wary of what we pick and what we don't really consume anything that we see on the field. One of the tests that we do is we chew it a little bit and we spit it out, because sometimes when it's bitter, we're able to say what species it might be. If it's earthy, it might be a different species. But really, there is no one truth tells all. Like, for example, one of the myths that we hear commonly is that the more colorful or vibrant a mushroom is, the more dangerous it is to consume, the more poisonous it can be. And that's simply not true. If you go and look at this mushroom called the death cap, it is the most boring looking white beige mushroom you'll ever see, but is also the most toxic and most poisonous, right? So there's really no one size fits all. Podaxis pastellaris seems to come in two distinct sizes. Have you looked into this? Not particularly, but we're just beginning to find samples and specimens. So if you've got any previous knowledge that you have, and if you're open to sharing that with the center, that would be incredibly helpful. If you know any hotspots, if you've seen them before, that would be super helpful. Fungus related to bacteria? No, they make up a completely separate kingdom. They do look the same, and so historically, that's why they were studied with botany and with plants, but completely different. What kind of conditions are the desert truffles found in? Any tips in trying to look for them? We think that they grow in association with this plant called the Helianthemum lippi, which is called the rock rose. And we know that the rock rose grows in almost gravel plain-like conditions as opposed to sandy deserts. And so when it is time for the desert truffle to fruit, it will crack open the earth, the really hard, almost gravel-like earth, and then sprout up. And so look for rock roses. And if you see them, let me know. How do we contribute? Yeah, join the iNaturalist project. We're going to start doing, I don't know, workshops out of the center. So keep a watch out, keep a lookout, drop me an email. But yeah, we'll try and do more sessions as and when come. White mushrooms emerge in my garden after applying mulch. Oh, cool. Send me pictures. And sometimes I notice animals eating them, such as mice. Yeah, they're great food sources. They're great food sources. That would most likely be from the fertilizer, from the potting soil that we have. But yeah, great food sources for everybody. Okay, I think that was all the questions. Drop me a question if you ever have questions that are not this. That's my email ID. That's my number. Find me. Send me pictures. I love them all. But yeah, that's everything for me. Thank you for listening. That was very long, but thank you for listening.
Thank you so much. I had to do nothing. I just had to listen. You brought the poll. You read the questions. You did everything for me. Thank you so much. It was very interesting. So you guys have seen how special Georgina is, not only because she is studying fungi, which they are pretty special, but also she's quite interesting as a person. So just as highlights, iNaturalist is a very useful tool for all scientists because it allows us to see where the things, when the things are coming, how are they spreading out, and if they are staying and being residents or they are migratory. So it's a really useful tool, and anyone can use it. You don't even have to identify the thing that you are looking at. You just take a picture and then other people will identify it for you. So so please, since the fungi, it's just coming to get to be known here in the UAE, help Georgina and her team, and then maybe in a year time we will be able to have so much information.
How exciting.
Yeah, and please go and visit her in Terra. I'm sure that she will be more than happy to receive you
Yes,
guys
please.
and
If you have
explain to
any book
you.
recommendations as well, like drop me a text, borrow any of these books from me. They're all fungi related. They're all great. So many kids' books that I love. I love reading kids' books. So like, find me, come find me.
Yeah, please. So yeah, thank you so much. I forgot to mention in the beginning that we are issuing certificates of attendance if any of you is interested. But I need you to send me an email because I think that maybe in the last webinar I didn't explain it properly, and some people were waiting for it without, you know. But I need an email from you because not everyone actually needs it. So it makes my job and my life much easier. So I will drop my email here in the chat, and then anyone that wants the certificate of attendance can send me a message. And also, if you have any questions or you don't have the contact from Georgina, you can ask me. I will give it to you, and the session will be uploaded in our YouTube channel. So as always, we will put it on Instagram, and yeah. So I think someone put the thoughts on Entangled Life by
Yeah,
Marilyn Sheldrake.
yeah, Merlin Sheldrake. Great question as well. Entitled Life is a great, great read. You'll see I've got the illustrated version right there. For when we launched the center 2 months ago, he actually sent us a really lovely message that we played about how important it is for us to be able to understand fungi in arid ecosystems. For anybody who is not into the sort of the mycology and the anatomy and the fungal side of things, but wants to explore its connection with us as humans, with connection of us with nature and the fungal world, and sort of storytelling in fungi, then I highly recommend you read Entitled Life.
Good. Well, thank you, Georgina. It was amazing. I learned so much stuff I did,
Hey.
that I didn't know. So, so yeah, thank you so much. Everyone have a good evening, and hopefully I will see you next month with another webinar. Thank
Yay.
you.
Thanks, Maria. Thanks, everybody. See ya. Have a good
Thank
evening.
you. Bye bye.